Finn Harper had seen plenty of broken things in his time: wrecked ships, gutted machines, abandoned settlements. Dannon the Four was a graveyard of forgotten technology and discarded dreams. As an independent mechanic, he made his living picking through the wreckage, salvaging what others had left behind. It was lonely work, but it suited him just fine. The fewer people he had to deal with, the better. But this was something else entirely. Finn stood at the jagged mouth of a half-buried alien freighter, its hull corroded by time and radiation storms. It was one of the old models, likely crashed decades ago, judging by the vines creeping through its ruptured plating. He had come here expecting nothing more than scrap. Maybe an old reactor core if he was lucky. Instead, he found it. The Wolf lay curled in the shadows of the cargo hold, its massive frame eerily still, barely distinguishable from the wreckage around it. Its fur, though matted and dulled by grime, still held a faint luminescence, a silver-blue sheen that shimmered in the dim light filtering through the torn ceiling. Finn's breath hitched. He'd seen alien creatures before, some tamed, some feral, but this was something else entirely. This was not an animal left behind by accident. It was deliberately abandoned. The thick, rusted chains around its legs told him as much. The crude metal collar, fused into its neck, was a restraint of some kind. Someone had chained it here, left it to rot inside this broken ship, and yet it was still alive. Barely. A weak breath shuddered through its rib cage, the only movement, betraying its fragile grip on life. Finn crouched, caution warring with something deeper, something raw and instinctual. He had spent years minding his own business, avoiding trouble. When he saw it, this was trouble screaming at him. But he couldn't just walk away. He reached out carefully, fingers hovering just above the creature's muzzle. The wolf's eyes flickered, then cracked open, revealing two startling golden irises, dim but intelligent. They locked onto him, filled with exhaustion and something else. Resignation. Like it knew this was the end. Like it had been waiting for death to finally come. Finn exhaled sharply. Not today, buddy. Getting the wolf out of the ship was hell. The chains were rusted but still thick enough that it took Finn 20 minutes and a plasma cutter to free its limbs. Even then, the wolf barely moved. It was worse off than he thought. Starved, weak, its muscles atrophied from months of forced stillness. Finn was no veterinarian, but he knew enough about survival to tell that this creature was holding on by sheer will alone. And sheer will wouldn't be enough for much longer. By the time he managed to haul the wolf onto a makeshift sled, strapped, together from scavenged panels and reinforced with stabilizing thrusters, his arms felt like they were going to give out. Dragging a half-ton alien predator across the wastelands was not how he planned to spend his evening, but here he was, sweating and swearing under his breath as he powered through. The wolf never made a sound. It just watched him, eyes half-lidded, tracking his movements as if trying to understand why he was doing this. Finn didn't have an answer. He had spent years teaching himself not to care, not to get involved. This was not his problem. He could have left the thing in that ship, let nature take its course, but something in those golden eyes had unraveled him. So now, he had a half-dead alien wolf in his workshop, lying motionless on an old tarp while he rummaged through his supplies, trying to figure out how the hell you rehabilitate something not even remotely human. He worked on instinct. Water first, small, doses carefully dripped between parched lips. Then nutrients, strips of dried meat, softened with water, placed near its muzzle in case it had the strength to eat. The wolf did not eat. That worried him. Finn sat back, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. He had no idea what he was doing. "You better not die after all this effort," he muttered, leaning against his work table, staring at the unmoving form before him. "I don't have the patience for a funeral." Silence. Then, slowly, the wolf's chest rose with a deeper breath. Finn blinked. The golden eyes cracked open once more, staring at him with something new. Not just exhaustion, not just resignation, recognition. Finn's stomach twisted, an unfamiliar sensation coiling in his gut. That was the moment he knew. This creature wasn't just going to let go, it was going to live. And whether he was ready or not, that meant he was responsible for it now. The wolf was dying. Finn could see it in the shallow breaths, the way its ribs pressed too sharply against its skin, the exhaustion that clung to it like a second coat of fur. Whatever strength it had left was burning out fast. But the eyes, those golden eyes, had changed. Finn had seen the look of dying creatures before, the quiet surrender, the stillness of something that had already accepted its fate. Fate. That look was gone. This wolf, whoever or whatever it was, had chosen to fight. Finn exhaled sharply and rolled up his sleeves. All right, buddy. If you're not giving up, neither am I. The first few days were rough. Finn adjusted his usual work schedule to fit the needs of his unexpected patient. His garage-turned-workshop smelled less like coolant and scrap metal and more like disinfectant and makeshift medical supplies. The wolf barely ate at first, but Finn didn't give up. He tried different combinations of food, some meats, some alien. Fruits he knew were safe, even a high-protein gel formula he'd once used on himself after a bad accident. On the third day, the wolf finally took a bite. It wasn't much, just a slow, weak movement, teeth clamping down on a strip of softened meat before struggling to chew. But Finn saw it for what it was. Progress. By the end of the first week, the wolf was moving its front legs again. It wasn't graceful, hell, it was barely functional. Every attempt to move left it shaking with exertion. Finn had to stop himself from interfering. The old soldier in him wanted to help, to lift, to support. But something told him the wolf wouldn't appreciate it. So he sat, and he watched, and he let it struggle. Somewhere deep down, he knew this was how it had survived for so long, sheer stubborn will. On the 10th day, Finn woke up to the sound of scraping metal, bolting upright from the old cot he kept in the corner of the workshop. He turned, just in time to see the wolf standing. Its back legs still trembled, its muscles still strained. But it was up. The wolf's golden eyes flicked to Finn, and something passed between them, something unspoken. Finn let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Yeah, he murmured, you're going to be all right. The problem with bringing a half-ton alien wolf back from the brink of death was that it eventually got healthy enough to start making demands. Finn had seen hints of its intelligence before, the calculating eyes, the way it tracked his every movement, the small shifts in its body language when he spoke. But now, as its strength returned, so did its personality, and it was stubborn as hell. The first time Finn tried to get the wolf to rest after a failed attempt at walking, it growled at him, not out of aggression, but out of sheer determination, like it had spent too long lying down and refused to go back. The second time, it dragged itself halfway across the workshop floor, collapsing in an exhausted heap beside Finn's workbench. The third time, it snapped its jaws at him when he tried to move it back to its cot. Finn rubbed his temples. You're impossible, you know that? The wolf flicked an ear at him. That did it. He needed something to call it. Can't just keep calling you wolf. He leaned back, arms crossed, studying the creature. Its fur had regained some of its luster, silver streaked with hints of deep blue. There was something regal about it, even covered in scars. You remind me of something, Finn murmured, tapping his fingers against the workbench, thinking. Then it hit him. Argus. The wolf's ears perked slightly. Finn smirked. Yeah, Argus. It suits you. The wolf, Argus now, huffed softly as if testing. The weight of the name. Finn swore the damn thing was thinking about it. Then slowly, it blinked once. A deliberate, slow movement. Agreement. Finn felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't expected. You and me, Argus, he murmured. Looks like we're stuck together. The wolf rested its massive head on its front paws, golden eyes never leaving Finn. And for the first time since bringing him home, Finn was sure of one thing. He hadn't just saved Argus. Argus had chosen him. Argus grew stronger with each passing day. His once wasted muscles filled out. His coat regained its luster. His movements became fluid, powerful, dangerous. Finn had no doubt that whatever species this wolf came from, it was built for war. The quiet intelligence in Argus's golden eyes told him as much. But it was something else that unsettled him. The way Argus would lift his head suddenly, ears perked toward the sky as if listening to something Finn couldn't hear. The way he paced near the entrance of the workshop at night, eyes locked on the stars. Something ancient and restless in his gaze. It made Finn uneasy. Expecting company? Finn asked one evening, watching as Argus sat rigidly at the workshop's entrance, staring at the horizon. The wolf didn't react. He remained still, the kind of stillness that made Finn's gut twist with instinctual unease. Finn sighed, tossing down his rag. You know, if you just tell me who you belong to, I could probably. A sound cut through the night air, sharp, mechanical. Finn's blood ran cold. Argus turned his head toward the sky, ears twitching. Finn followed his gaze, just in time to see it. 2 streaks of silver cut through the clouds, moving in perfect synchronization. Starships. And not just any starships. They were looking for something. The engines burned low, moving in a slow, deliberate sweep over the wasteland. Their searchlights cutting through the dust like predators' eyes. They were scanning, looking. Finn barely had time to process before Argus moved, a blur of silver fur and raw muscle. The wolf lunged at him, knocking Finn flat against the dusty floor. He barely managed a strangled grunt before Argus pressed him down, pinning him there with surprising gentleness, but an unmistakable warning. Stay down. Finn's breath came fast and sharp, heart hammering as he listened. The ships hovered. Overhead, their searchlights sweeping dangerously close. Finn could hear the soft pulsing hum of their engines, the eerie precision in their movements. Whoever was in those ships wasn't just looking for salvage. They were looking for Argus. Finn felt it in his gut. Minutes passed in excruciating silence. Argus remained unmoving, his body wound tight like a coiled spring. Finn could feel his heartbeat thrumming beneath his ribs, faster than it should have been. Then, just as suddenly as they arrived, the ships moved on. The hum of their engines faded, swallowed by the endless stretch of desert and sky. Only when the last flicker of their searchlights disappeared over the horizon did Argus finally release Finn, stepping back with a low, controlled breath. Finn sat up slowly, rubbing his ribs, staring at the wolf in mute disbelief. Then he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. That was about you, wasn't it? Argus didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because Finn already knew. Finn didn't sleep that night. He kept his rifle close, watching the horizon for any sign of the ships returning. Argus remained tense, but silent, his ears flicking at every distant noise. It was the first time Finn had ever seen him afraid, and that scared him. By morning, he knew he had to make a decision. All right, buddy, Finn muttered, packing what little supplies he could carry. We need to move. My place isn't exactly built for intergalactic warfare. Argus watched him with unreadable eyes, tail flicking. Finn knew he sounded crazy. Leave his home? He had built this place with his own hands, survived out here on his own for years. But now he wasn't alone. And that meant he had something to lose. Just as he was finishing the last of his preparations, the ground rumbled beneath his feet. He froze. The hum of approaching engines filled the air, vibrating through his bones. He turned toward the sky, and his blood ran cold. The ships were back, and this time, they weren't alone. A third vessel descended, larger than the others, its sleek, black hull cutting against the sky like a blade. It hovered ominously over the junkyard, kicking up a storm of dust and sand as it deployed a landing ramp. Finn barely had time to curse before they arrived. Figure stepped onto the ramp first, tall, imposing. armored from head to toe in something that looked more ceremonial than functional. Deep crimson fabric trailed from their shoulders like a warlord's banner. Intricate markings decorating their silver-plated chestpiece, their face remained hidden behind a sleek black helmet. And behind them, a full squad of heavily armed soldiers. Finn felt his stomach drop. This wasn't some salvage crew. This was a retrieval mission. The lead figure strode forward with measured, confident steps, each movement precise and deliberate. Their voice, when they finally spoke, was a deep, commanding rumble. Human. Finn clenched his jaw, forcing his body to stay relaxed, though every instinct screamed at him to run. "I'm guessing this isn't a friendly house call," he said coolly, gripping his rifle a little tighter. The figure tilted their helmet slightly. "No, it is not." Their gaze flicked down to Argus, who had taken a defensive stance in front of Finn, his fur-bristling golden eyes locked onto the armored stranger with something that could only be described as recognition. Finn noticed, and so did the stranger. Quiet pause stretched between them. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, the figure reached up and removed their helmet. Finn stilled. Underneath wasn't the monstrous warlord he had expected. It was a woman. Her skin was pale silver, her features, sharp and striking, framed by a mane of dark braided hair. Her eyes. God's. Her eyes were the same golden hue as Argus's. Finn's breath caught in his throat. She knew Argus, and Argus knew her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something far more dangerous than anger. It carried grief. "You have my brother." The desert wind howled around them, kicking up dust and silence in equal measure. Finn's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared at the silver-skinned woman standing before him, her golden eyes burning with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "You have my brother." The word sent a slow, creeping chill through his veins. Finn shifted his gaze to Argus, who stood rigid beside him, muscles coiled, golden eyes locked onto the woman with something Finn couldn't decipher. He wasn't snarling, wasn't baring his teeth, but he also wasn't running to her. The armored soldiers behind her remained tense, hands hovering over their weapons, waiting for an order, but the woman didn't give one. Not yet. Finn squared his shoulders. "Brother, huh?" he said, his voice steady. "You sure about that?" She flicked her golden gaze to him, unreadable. "Do you think I would not recognize my own blood?" Finn exhaled, adjusting his grip on his rifle, even though he already knew it wouldn't do much against her kind. "Then tell me something, lady. If he's your brother, why the hell was he abandoned?" The woman stiffened, just for a second, but it was enough. Finn wasn't an idiot. He saw the flicker of pain in her expression, the sharp edge of guilt that flashed across her features before she locked it down behind a mask of cold authority. Whatever had happened to Argus, she wasn't proud of it. The seconds stretched painfully thin between them. Then finally she spoke. "It was not my doing." Finn tilted, his head. "Then who?" Her golden gaze darkened. "My father." A bitter laugh scraped Finn's throat. "Ah, family drama. That's just fantastic." The woman ignored his sarcasm. "He was left for dead because he was deemed weak. A disgrace to our lineage, a prince who could not rise to his full strength." Finn felt his gut clench. A prince? His eyes flicked to Argus, taking in the wolf's silent, tense posture. The way his ears twitched at the words, but his expression remained unreadable. Argus had never acted like royalty, but then again, what the hell did Finn know about alien nobility? "Your father sounds like a real bastard," Finn muttered. The woman's jaw tightened. "He was a king who valued strength above all else." Finn scoffed. "Yeah, sounds like an excuse for being a terrible parent." Something flickered in her gaze, but she said nothing. The wind howled louder, filling the silence between them. Then her expression hardened. "Regardless of the past, he is ours. He must return with us." Finn's muscles tensed. "And if he doesn't want to?" The soldiers behind her shifted, subtle but threatening. The woman exhaled, her voice softer but no less commanding. "Then you must Make him. Finn's grip tightened around his rifle. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. The moment stretched too thin. Finn could feel it. The shift in weight before a fight breaks loose. The silent countdown before someone makes the first move. Argus stepped forward, muscles taut beneath his shimmering fur. His golden eyes locked onto his sister, not with hatred, not with warmth, but with something else entirely. A challenge. His sister didn't break his gaze. You cannot stay here, brother, she said, softer now, like she was pleading rather than commanding. You know that. Finn's stomach twisted. She was right. If she had found them, others would too. And next time, they wouldn't give Finn a chance to talk. Argus huffed, his ears twitching. But he didn't step forward. He didn't yield. His sister's shoulders sagged just slightly, the weight of something unseen pressing against her spine. Do you even remember who you are? The wolf's throat rumbled, low and deep. Not quite a growl, but not quite silence either. Finn didn't know what to do, didn't know what the right choice was. All he knew was that Argus wasn't just an abandoned creature anymore. He was his. Finn exhaled sharply and took a step forward. You said your father abandoned him, left him to die because he wasn't strong enough. His voice was steady. Well, guess what? He survived. Without your people, without you. The woman's golden gaze snapped to Finn, sharp as a blade. Finn pushed forward. You think dragging him back to whatever royal hellhole he came from is going to fix that? You think it's going to make him whole again? He shook his head. No. You're just trying to put a leash back on something that already freed itself. The woman's hands curled into fists. You do not understand our ways. Maybe not, Finn admitted. But I do understand one thing. He turned to look at Argus. Beside him, his chest ached with the weight of what he had to say next. You don't owe me anything, buddy, he murmured. I meant what I said. If you want to go, I won't stop you. He swallowed hard. But if you want to stay, his voice dropped, steady but sure. I'll fight for you. Light burned in his eyes. Then, in a movement so slow it almost didn't register, Argus turned away from his sister. He stepped toward Finn. The weight of that choice slammed into the space between them like a goddamn supernova. His sister knew. Her soldiers knew. They had lost him. Finn barely had time to exhale before the woman's expression cracked. Then she drew her blade. She lunged. Finn barely had time to react. Her weapon gleamed in the harsh desert light, a curved alien design, crackling with energy along its edge. His instinct screamed at him to move, but she was fast. Unnaturally fast. In the space of a single breath, she closed the distance, swinging with lethal precision. Finn stumbled back, raising his rifle reflexively, but he knew damn well he wouldn't get a shot off before Argus moved. Like a streak of silver fire, the wolf intercepted. His massive form collided with his sister mid-strike, the impact like thunder, sending both of them skidding through the dust. She twisted mid-air, landing in a crouch. Blade still humming, Argus landed the same way, golden eyes burning with something Finn had never seen before. Recognition, pain, resolve. For a split second, neither of them moved. Then, she spoke, voice ragged. You fight me? Argus didn't answer. Instead, he charged. Finn barely managed to get out of the way as the two siblings clashed in a blur of movement. Teeth met steel, claws against armor, growls against sharp exhales. Brutal, fast, merciless. And Finn, he knew he was outmatched. His rifle was useless here. Too slow, too imprecise. Instead, he focused on the soldiers. They had hesitated at first, uncertain, waiting for their commander's orders. But now, seeing their leader locked in battle, their hesitation vanished. The first shot rang out. Finn dove for cover as energy blasts streaked through the air, tearing into the ground where he had stood. He rolled behind the wreckage of an old ship, barely breathing, then popped up and fired back. The first shot took down a soldier mid-step. The second missed, but it forced them to scatter. Finn clenched his jaw. This wasn't sustainable. They had the numbers, the firepower. And if Argus lost against his sister, it wouldn't matter how good of a shot Finn was. He had to end this. Quickly. Pressing a hand to the communicator in his ear, he opened a private channel. "Jareth, tell me you're listening." Static. Then, after an agonizing second, "Thought you'd never ask." Finn smirked. "You got something for me?" Jareth's voice came through smug as ever. "Let's just say, you might want a duck." Finn barely had time to react before the sky exploded. Streak of blue fire ripped through the clouds, then impact. The explosion sent soldiers flying. A shockwave of heat and light swallowed the battlefield. Finn pressed himself flat against the ground, heart hammering, ears ringing from the sheer force of it. Jareth hadn't been kidding. When the dust finally settled, Finn lifted his head. The battlefield had changed. Half the soldiers were down, either unconscious or scrambling for cover. The others hesitated, thrown off balance by the sudden attack. And in the center of it all, Argus and his sister still fought. But this time, Argus was winning. He had pushed her back, his movements faster, stronger, like he had finally remembered what he was. His sister fought just as fiercely, but Finn saw it in her stance. Hesitation. This wasn't a battle she had expected to lose. Then, in one final brutal movement, Argus lunged, jaws snapping just short of her throat. She froze. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Argus let go, not out of weakness, not out of mercy, but because he had already made his choice. Finn watched as the woman's golden eyes flickered. Uncertainty. Grief. Something deeper. Then, without another word, she stepped back. She sheathed her blade. Finn exhaled. Tension drained from his body. The remaining soldiers, those still standing, hesitated, looking to their leader for a command. She turned her gaze toward them, then to Finn, then, finally, to Argus. "Stay," she said. "Quiet. Stay with them." Finn's breath caught. This wasn't surrender. It was acceptance. She turned on her heel, signaling to her troops. Without another word, they retreated to their ships. Finn stood frozen as he watched the vessels rise, engines thrumming, then disappearing into the sky. Silence fell. Finn turned to Argus. The wolf met his gaze, golden eyes quiet, tired. "You stayed," Finn murmured. Argus exhaled, a low rumbling sound. Finn swore it sounded like agreement. A smile pulled at his lips. He reached out, not hesitantly this time, not cautiously. Argus met him halfway, and for the first time in years, Finn wasn't alone.